Black genius is a beautiful thing. You can defeat white supremacy with black genius. Oh, yes, you can. And for you young people in the room, let me just say this before I go to that next point. Anybody that has made a mistake in their life, can you raise your hand? So young people, did you see that? So young folks, understand that everybody has made a mistake. Your mistake don't have to define you. I made a bunch of mistakes. I mean, some real bad ones, right? I went to federal prison because of my mistakes. And I had to work myself back into my life and to take my name back and to take my life back. And so when I was starting to fight for police accountability, you know the first thing they're going to say, that guy got a record. He's this, he's that, and he's that. But black genius don't worry about that. Let me tell you something about mistakes. This is what I learned. Yeah, just thank you. Let me tell you, this is what I learned. This is what I learned about my mistakes through black genius and how to overcome what people will try to throw up in your face. Tell your story before your enemy does. Did you hear what I said? Tell your story before your enemy tells your story. So for 20 years in my life, I've been telling my story, speaking in prisons, on TBN, on Montel, everywhere I've gone, I've been telling my story of redemption, of what God is capable of still doing. I've been telling my story. So look at this. So when the system started talking about, you did this and put me in the newspaper and all that, you know what the people said? We've been knowing that for 20 years. You ain't telling us nothing we don't know. Don't let nobody define you. You define your own story. No matter what, yes. Young folks, you never have to be defined by a mistake. Get up every single time. Because everybody in this room that raised their hand had mistakes just like you. Everybody's going to have a mistake. But what's going to define you and define who you're going to be in your life is when you get back up and you brush that mud off of you and you go get it back right. Every time you got to get up because there's brilliance in you. There's greatness in you. And these people here, you seeing the finished product of great work that everybody's doing here. But they're going to share with you their own stories of where they came from to let you know you don't have to be defined by your mistakes. Not one bit. So be encouraged, right? And let me say this. My father, rest in peace, he was a brilliant man, the most brilliant man I ever known in my life before. And I remember we having a conversation one time, and my dad says, you know, son, I have some expectations of you. I said, bring it on, Dad. What's up? He said, son, this race in life that you're running, this is what I want you to do. I want you to finish the race. And I was like, shoot, nothing. I ain't gonna finish the race. He said, hold on. He said, with all your disadvantages, son, as a young black man, not only do I want you to finish the race, I want you to finish first. Oh my God. I got to finish first? My dad was genius because he knew that I would have to create the genius inside of me in order to do what he asked of me. This is why we must also impress on our children high goals. You see, and there's communities where the mother and the father might be a doctor and a lawyer. And the kid grows up, and the doctor and the lawyer is something that's real relative, real normal to them. They grow up knowing that this is nothing. And then there are some communities that is a dream. We in our communities have to normalize greatness amongst our children. Yeah. We have to normalize greatness to when they wake up And they recognized the greatness and the genius inside of them regardless of the obstacles. Let me just say this. I grew up, my dad was a pimp. My mom was a prostitute. I had all the disadvantages in the world that they told me, that you would never be anything other than that. And if I would have listened, my whole life would have been defined by what they said I could never be. So I remember one day that I was teaching at a university, and I was explaining to them about this book that's called Siddhartha. And I'm almost done here. It's one of my favorite books because this book is a young man who is trying to find his life. And his father was a priest. And his father wanted Siddhartha to follow behind him, but Siddhartha didn't want to follow behind his daddy. So they had a disagreement, and none of them talked for days to each other, just sit there and didn't talk to one another. Until ultimately the father relented and says, okay. So Siddhartha and his best friend Govinda went and started discovering life together. They went and discovered this, and I'm telling this story to the students in college, right? They went and discovered this religion. They experienced this religion. They start discovering all these religions until one day they heard about the illustrious one who was the Buddha. So when they heard about him, Siddhartha's best friend Govinda went and joined the Buddha. Siddhartha didn't. So they broke up for a while. And periodically, Siddhartha would come back, Govinda would come back to Siddhartha, and they would talk, and then Govinda would go back to the Buddha. Here's where I tell the students, one day that Govinda is going to be a great professor up underneath the Buddha. Understand that, students. So here's the next scene. Siddhartha is walking down the street like this, and the Buddha is coming the opposite, the same direction, and they meet each other. And the Buddha knows Siddhartha. The Buddha says to Siddhartha, Siddhartha, why haven't you chosen to join me? Do you believe there's a better way? And Siddhartha says, no, Buddha, I don't believe there's a better way. But this is what changed my life when he said something. He said, but it is impossible for you to teach or communicate to me what you have learned in the hour of your enlightenment. In other words, Siddhartha said, there is no other way, but I'm not trying to be a professor. I'm trying to be a Buddha like you. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I told the students where I come from, I said, had I took what society said my life would be, that's all it would have been. I was forced outside to find new information and knowledge. And that new information that forced me up outside of the norm, because you come from a pimp, you can never be nothing. I was forced outside to find new information. And that new information, I told them college students, got me here teaching you and your professor. Black genius! To my brothers and sisters that might still be in the streets where I used to come from. What I learned is some valuable principles about things that we've done in the street that's transferable to a regular life. There are some geniuses that you learn that are transferable. When we were doing police accountability, people would ask me, how are you so calm? I said, because I was in places in the streets that if I wasn't calm, my life would be taken from me. That was something I was able to use. So when I had all the people talking all that crazy stuff, saying he's this and all that, it didn't move me because I'd already been in a place that could have cost my life if I didn't show poise. So there's a lot of relatable things that you could use over here and conquer the system from the streets. Everything don't have to be lost from out there. And let me say this. One of the most important things is resolve. Resolve. Somebody asked me, when you were facing life in prison, because we've seen that movie American Pimp, we saw you in that movie. I couldn't have did that. And I told them, I know. Because if you was just making your mind up at the time of your trouble, you're going to fail. You have to resolve your mind. You have to be resolved that if you're fighting for something you believe in, you have to be willing to give your life for it. Martin Luther King said, if a man living haven't found something worth dying for, he's not even fit to live. If a man living haven't found something worth dying for, he's not fit to live. That's resolve. So if we are going to get our people together, we're going to have that same resolve. If we're going to unify together, we're going to have that same resolve. And when I talked to Umar Johnson with the last event we had, and RZA and Judge Joe Brown, I told them, as I told my brothers and sisters here, this is not about ideology, because the system has used ideology to separate our people for hundreds of years. This is what this is about. This is about black unity, black love, and our youth. And if we can all come together elevating that, we're going to get the unity that we need as a people. But that's the narrative. Because when you start bringing ideology in, the system is perfect at knowing how to divide us with that. So everybody that's been coming here from all over the country is on the same narrative that you must take out there. This is about black unity, black love, and our youth. That's the narrative that we're starting here in Washington State and carrying it all over this country. Thank you. Love you guys.